Hello, welcome back to the Elves Abridged, where last time we did a couple of battles down our western attack approaches, where we relied on the AI to do some stuff for us. We ended up losing an army along the way, but gaining a territory. We also lost a territory in the central portion of the front, but the two armies that invaded got cut down to size by the Dunedain, and we've wiped out about half of what remained after that, leaving just the settlement to retake. But before we get to that, during the same term, I was looking around with my diplomat here and made a key discovery, that being that Isengard think a ceasefire is a very generous option, meaning they probably want to stop the war, and we may actually be able to get out of the war for a while, which would benefit us immensely because we can most likely field a much bigger army than them if we have time to bring it to the front lines. So because of that, my new plan is to try and end the war as soon as possible. I've got my Stephen Colbert diplomat who I can offer the ceasefire with at a different place on the front line, so we can still make the deal this turn, but we need to conclude the Dunlaric situation. Otherwise the ceasefire would allow the uruks to keep it, so we want to take this place and then get a ceasefire so we have the best possible frontline situation when the war resumes after we've got our troops back in action. So here is a siege assault with a relatively strong garrison inside. Luckily we don't need to rely on the AI this time because the army I'm attacking with has about half of its slots free. To start with, we just need to use our siege equipment to open the gates, even though it did actually say the gates should be opened due to a spy or something. Not quite sure what happened, but we opened the gates with our siege equipment. The problem was at the northern gate, the enemy after a while decided to come and defend it just as I was about to go through. So while we got in the eastern gate without incident, there's going to be some fighting here, and them coming over here just means the towers nearby will activate. I think there's one or two of these towers that are real ones shooting ballista bolts at us. It's pretty much impossible to see it, but we'll take some more losses as a result. Here's the other group that came in through the east gate. I've just set them up in this open space to try and draw the enemy away from the nearby capture point and get a fight going where we can possibly rout stuff. At the northern gate, the enemy put their stuff up on the wall, so I've got my archers here trying to shoot up to grab some kills. Not very effective. Still, the archers for the elves seem to be quite disappointing. It's so difficult to actually kill enemies with them, especially things like these crossbow troops and the beast slayers. Because they're armoured units, they're all but invincible to arrow fire, so almost all the arrows that hit won't get kills, unfortunately, meaning this doesn't achieve all that much. We end up just grinding away here with some troops. At least they are away from the capture point, so we can, in theory, rout them. And we're starting to get something similar happening over here with my eastern approach. I set up the ballistas to fire towards the capture point, and stuff started to come over to challenge us, and that's going to be a very normal sort of field battle, a couple of units just fighting in lines. I'm also trying to micro a unit of cav to go to the south gate to let some more cav in. The micro is kind of difficult at this stage as I constantly switch between these three projects. Things aren't going that well over here at the northern wall because the crossbows the enemy have up there are killing my archers. Crossbows of course don't have the problem with armor saves to quite the same degree, so they can cut us down pretty well. I figured what we could do is actually start destroying the wall while the enemy is standing on it using my siege engines. So we're going to go ahead with that plan. Meanwhile, I've just about got my cav to micro around all of the enemies and stuff to get to that south gate now with the waypoint, so we'll be able to have a few more cav units come in through that gate. Here are some forgotten infantry outside the east gate need to come in and get involved in this fight. And here's that fight I was trying to get started out in the open space. As I said, going to be a very normal affair, just a couple of units fighting the front of our line. We can do some outflanking with the archers and our unengaged middle unit to make that go our way. Over at the northern wall though, the enemy got off the wall before I finished my plan to destroy it. Also, I think I lost one of my catapults to the enemy's ballista towers. The issue now is that because they've charged down from the wall, really all I have here are our lower quality archers and siege crews, and they're going to run right into them. I think they're just trying to run past me to go back to the capture point, but because we're blocking their way with vulnerable units, we end up taking a bunch of really bad melee fights. Meanwhile, our fight in the open space has been successful. Looks like we've already won it by this point, just a few survivors left to kill, and the capture point is now much less heavily defended. We're also in through the southern gate with a bunch of horse archers. The enemy did send a unit of pikes to challenge them, but of course the horse archers can just stay out of their way pretty easily. Now we're starting our attack on the capture point, just a few scraps there to finish off. At this stage, most of the enemy stuff is over here on this road, trying to come back from the north end of town, and kind of sandwiching me here. I had some units going over to help that have been caught, and as I said, we've got siege crews and low quality archers still fighting the guys at the back. Overall, quite a messy situation. At least the capture point attack's going to be better. They've only got a few units here, and we can just charge in to overpower them with melee units. The stuff that's trying to return ends up in an okay situation for us, because while we've blocked them on the road kind of accidentally, the fact that they are blocked means that as we gradually pour more and more stuff into the fight, we'll be able to stop the enemy from escaping as they rout. So that group's now going to be very vulnerable to taking rout casualties and captures. Still a bit of fighting going on at the very back there at the northern wall, but we can just ignore that at this point. The next time I check on the road situation, looks like it all worked out, everything's just dead or captured. So that's really the battle won. Now we just need to head in and finish stuff off on the capture point. Unfortunately, those pikes we saw earlier came over to the capture point, and they're going to be fighting to the last man as a result. I tried to take them out with archers, but again, disappointing. They seem like a unit that might be vulnerable to archer fire, but their high armor stats mean that while they take the odd casualty, really you can just use up all your ammo and do virtually nothing, so the archer units aren't particularly helpful out of melee. Eventually we just charge in with everything, hit the 6x speed button, and wait for us to just take the casualties and eventually grind through them, giving us this result in the end. We did take more casualties than usual, as you might expect in a siege attack of that level of mess, but now the next stage on our plan needs to happen. However, there's a big problem. The ceasefire offer is no longer very generous, it's now the opposite, very demanding. It seems that the siege was some kind of leverage. The only reason they wanted to get peace with me was to keep that settlement. But now that I'm not threatening it anymore, they're not interested in peace. Or maybe it's because this diplomat, our Colbert guy, isn't as good as the other one, and that's changing the balance in the opponent's eyes. Whatever the case, the war does continue, so we're just going to have to take what they throw at us. For this turn, they hit us with a big stack at Alkford that just lays siege, but no attack yet, and just a bunch of other small armies walking about, forming up in their core regions that we now have eyes on. Once it's our turn again, we're going to switch back to the Eastern Front, where I've got a move to make. We recently took Onodrith, and we're just kind of sitting here with enemy territories in 3 directions, not a very safe location. I'm going to split our army here to make a little attack group under Elrond. The plan is we're going to go and attack that settlement to the right, but we're going to stop on the way on this bridge. The idea will be that this small attack group will be able to take the local enemies down if they come and attack me on the bridge. So that's what we hope there. Meanwhile, everything else will sit in the town. There is a small army nearby that we'll deal with later, and a bigger army on the way. I've also got my own reinforcements on the way at the top of the screen there. So we're just going to have a standoff and be defensive. Here's a move I set up in the previous part. We're moving an army to attack Karis here. We arrive and set up the siege. We're going to do this siege, but first I wanted to test something. I thought now that I've got them under siege, maybe this will regain me my leverage to get that peace deal. Unfortunately, it appears not to be the case. I can always get the peace deal to be generous or balanced, but they never accept it. I think it has to be generous from the beginning for them to actually want the peace deal. So nothing comes of that, and then I thought, well, we might as well attack Karis right now because there is a nearby enemy army. We'd better just break in and be inside the walls and then defend this position. The city does have a high-level enemy commander inside, but when I say city, that's a bit of exaggeration. It calls it a city, but really it's just an encampment. So there are no towers, and the enemy's capture point is close enough to our deployment zone that we can effectively attack it from outside the settlement. This means potentially we can do very well by just hanging back and getting as many kills as we can before going in. But I am going to be in a hurry to go in, because the enemy had 2 sets of ballistas inside, and they were going to snipe away at my high value units, of course. So I ended up breaking down the gate as soon as possible and rushing on in to set up for a not particularly good battle really. We're going to be at a disadvantage because while we have lots of units, we can't use them very well since we're fighting in all of these little choke points across the field. Over here on our right, we end up taking a charge from the enemy general on our good archers. At the last second, we get a massive volley into the general's unit, but again, it doesn't do anything even at point blank range, so that kind of sucks. We do though have my own general coming in from behind to engage this guy in melee, while the archers will still be able to fire. And yes, across the rest of the camp, it's just all these little fights where we need to grind through the enemy since it's hard to walk past them. I did do some stuff where I tried to force movement orders to get cav on the other side of them and things like that, so you can sort of outflank them just taking casualties, pushing your way through. I was mainly focusing on doing this little move. I've got my Pelagian Marines to throw their jabs into the enemy general's unit at super close range, hoping to pick up a load of kills. It does kill a couple of them, but overall they're going to run out of ammo before they do anything too special. And yes, we're going to have to just grind this one out and gradually kill everything, in particular the things on the capture points that of course will not rout. They also have berserkers that won't rout as well. And here we are with the last of the berserkers getting killed. Overall an average sort of result, but the main result is that the town has been captured. Although my plan to use it defensively isn't going to be that good, having seen the map, so staying here isn't necessarily a good idea. That said, we're going to be doing it for this turn at least, since we don't have much movement. We'll see if the enemy have any counterattacks for us. Next, to the north, we need to deal with that big siege at Alkford. Luckily, I had seen this army in the past and started moving forces thinking something might go wrong, so they can arrive this turn, giving us this fight. Not an ideal battle because there's quite a lot of enemy stuff here, and both of the armies have decent enough generals. They've also got a few decent enough units in there. My force isn't in that bad condition because it's a combined force of other armies and reinforcements and things. All of the bits of the army that used to be dead have mostly been removed, so we've got a decent army to use as well. We start off skirmishing with the enemy, launching a few here of our special arrows from these steel bow guys. Those things go through armour, I think. And of course the siege attacks will certainly go through armour and pick us up some juicy early kills. We also get a good move from the enemy here. They send their wargs to attack our pike troops. That's kind of them, should have an advantage against those guys. They're going to be doing a lot of warg stuff in this battle because they had 4 or 5 units of them. They're sort of doing flank attacks. They're doing flank attacks, but at an angle that doesn't really go around our flank. So they're kind of just running diagonally into the unit on the ends of the lines. That's fine by me. Over here on the right, they've got something more serious going with a sandwich attack on my good cav. I'm going to rely on my good cav to just take that attack and fight back to break their way out of it. And as for the front line, that's also going to be a bit of a grind. No strategy really. Going to try and just defeat the enemy front on, since all of our units are quickly engaged doing stuff, with the exception of the archers, who I guess don't need to be shooting at the enemy's archers, but that's what they're doing for now. Trying to get my cav in against those archers and the siege stuff are attacking them as well. Otherwise, we're just waiting for some of these melees to end so we can get some free units to start doing maneuvers. And even if we do rear attack the enemy's main blobs and stuff, it's not going to do anything while those generals are still alive. Here's one of those generals out on the flank fighting a reinforcement ballistic crew, which is down to 1 guy and some of my cav. Luckily we pick up a general kill, not sure if it was the one we were just looking at. There's another guy somewhere. But anyway, that seems to be important because we start seeing some routes immediately after that, and the central battle is now going to clear up, allowing us to charge down the archers and start pushing this battle towards a victory soon. Most stuff across the field begins to rout and we have to chase the enemy down because that second general is still alive. So even though we're across the percentage threshold for killing things, we need to make sure the characters die. Once he's down, we leave the battle. Not the best result though. About twice the losses we would expect to take in a standard field battle. And that was just because the frontline grind wasn't very advantageous to us. So this army is again in bad condition. We're really struggling here on this western front because it's hard to reinforce this position. So we're lacking in troops again after that last fight. At least as it stands, there's no visible other army in that general sector that's coming in to attack, so we're going to be free to advance and perhaps go for an attack somewhere over there. Now jumping back over to the east, we're going to do this small battle that I highlighted earlier. Just need to kill the guys near Onedrith so that they can't link up with the bigger army that might come over from the west. An easy enough battle, but worth doing with manual resolve to minimise losses. In this situation we just want to take out their ballista as soon as possible, because then we'll have an absolute ranged advantage and their slow heavy infantry will be vulnerable to my ballista and perhaps a little bit vulnerable to all of our archers. So the horse archers go in to take out the ballista. Glorfindel meanwhile is fighting some wargs in the distance. This is their captain's unit, so we're just going to overpower that captain and try to grab the captain kill. Those pikes there are going to have not an especially bad time against my horse archers, because while we're just moving away and constantly shooting them, it doesn't do anything as previously mentioned, so they just end up covered in arrows. Meanwhile, Glorfindel is gradually killing these wargs. He takes his first casualty after killing like 2/3 of the enemies, so we can probably win that melee. Meanwhile, their warriors have been surrounded by all of my stuff here at the main section of our formation, and they rout, so we can take them out there easy enough. Then we are free to gradually kill the pikes as they march around. The archers eventually pick up a few kills, and of course the ballistas are perfect for shooting into this tightly grouped set of armoured units. Down they go after a while. They eventually rout once I just cav charge them with everything. And there's the result. We did get the win for basically no casualties, just what we needed. After that, I decided not to go back to the town because I can set up an ambush on the road that the armies to the west will almost certainly have to use to get to me, so I figured maybe we'll actually try an ambush here, since doing a siege defense doesn't necessarily grant us any advantage. We're going to start pushing down in the centre again after the Dunlarak situation has been resolved. With fresh and good reinforcements now on the way, we'll soon have an elite army in this area. In Isengard's turn, they go ahead and attack Elrond on the bridge as I was hoping, so this is good, although they do have an advantage here. Their army's quite decent for making a bridge attack because they have tons of ballistas and quite a few decent units in there as well, including the Orthanc Guard, who I think are Isengard's best unit. Also, Elrond's force is not in ideal condition, being undersized and under strength, but we can still use our siege weapons to do the usual stuff. At first I wanted to target their ballistas and try to take a couple out. I might have killed 1 or 2 of the 10 or so they have, but generally you can't kill them fast enough, so it's better to just focus on killing enemies and making the battle be over as soon as possible, since realistically the only way we're going to take out those enemy ballistas is to get to the other side. There were some juicy hits that I didn't see unfortunately, but I suddenly heard them. And yes, now the enemy run into our blob as usual, but things do go a bit different, because it seems some of the enemy units are trying to run to the other side of our blob, and that allows them to jank their way through the entire thing and come out the back. So that's trouble for our siege crews, because as the enemy keep walking forward, the siege weapons will end up in melee, as will some of the archers, and they're not going to do very well in those melees, suffice to say. So really we're just kind of hoping that the enemy will somehow die in this blob. Our men are fighting them, but we've totally lost the centre of it, as you can see. We are fortunate in that as I throw everything into this blob to try and contain it, somewhere we kill the enemy captain. After that, most of what's left in the blob is now down to either routing, wavering or shaken, so the usual mass rout plan can now go ahead. We're still being bombarded by those ballistas pretty heavily, but there's nothing we can do, so we're just going to hack through and get to the point when our cav will be able to cross the bridge and do something about it. And as for this infantry grind, it's going to be mostly okay, because even though lots of stuff is fighting to the death, I still believe fighting to the death doesn't actually work, in that you can't take casualties against a unit that's fighting to the death. They'll play the animations, but they'll never kill any of your guys. That's what I think is the case anyway. So soon we've worked our way through that blob, and indeed I sent cav over to the other side to go and scare their ballistas off. They're doing the thing where they're actually withdrawing the good idea from the AI, so I had to attack them as they ran off the map. Eventually the battle ends. It didn't end for a long time because they were withdrawing rather than routing. That means the battle doesn't technically finish until everything leaves the field. We did take moderate casualties, especially for the size of Elrond's army, but maybe there's enough left over to go ahead with my plan. However, at the start of the next turn, a new plan comes to mind, because we finally discover the big man himself. Saruman is at Gind, this random town. And of course, we actually win the campaign if Isengard are defeated. We can do that by just killing Saruman and perhaps an heir orc. There's maybe 1 or 2 left out there, I don't remember. So with that in mind, that can be our focus, because that might be easier than actually defeating Isengard conventionally. Anyway, Elrond goes ahead to set up the siege I was planning to do. However, I didn't want to go and make the attack right now, because I wanted to actually make a ram for that one, so that we can save ammunition on our siege equipment for killing enemy units. Since we are quite weak there, we could use that extra strength. At Onodrith, I'm just putting a decent army together from all of the bits and bobs we have. We'll come back to that another time. And in our central front, we can rush down to go towards Dunyard here. And there's pretty much nothing inside. There are plenty of enemies outside the town, so I'm going to heavily reinforce this location since there's a counterattack risk. But yes, it seems like we'll surely take that place, although again we're not going to look at that in this part because I was concerned with other things, so I just left the siege going without doing the very easy attack. Instead, I'm checking out what we can do about Gynd. We can just abandon Karis effectively and try to send a force towards Saruman because taking him out is a big priority. That force will be in danger once it gets there. Major counterattack risks, but if we kill Saruman that might not matter. At Alkford we're going to move down, quickly kill that small army or almost kill it. And this force will now be responsible for dealing with the Lond Angren area, where there's enough stuff to take that territory from us if the Uruks want, so we'll just set up ready to counterattack. Then back over to Onodrith, we're going to come out of the town and kill the enemy standing in front of us. Obviously my ambush plan didn't work, but for some reason the enemy walked up and stopped in the ambush zone. I just didn't get the option to actually do the ambush. We end up then doing this field battle against them here. Nothing too special about this one, although it was a very aggressive battle because the enemy had a lot of archers, and because the melee stuff they had was very much distracted by my cav going around the edges. We had a lot of opportunities to just run straight forwards and plough into their crossbows and archers, and I thought we might as well take that opportunity, so we just go for it all over the place with our cav attempting to do flank attacks as well. Looks like those guys are in too deep. And Glorfindel is fighting some powerful enemy units from the front, probably not going to be doing all that well over here. I'm going to pull him out of that one. But yes, this fight's just going to be a micro fest as we charge all over the place, killing everything that's weak against melee units, and then trying to surround everything else. Somewhere in the mix, we fortunately grab another captain kill. I think it was their wargs on the right side of the screen here somewhere. And with that, it might actually be possible to get some surroundage and poundage going and make the enemy rout. These Urukai archers clearly don't mind being charged by Glorfindel. Maybe he can kill enough of them to change their mind. With things down to Shaken and stuff, it's just a matter of waiting for us to win. So let's cut to when these fights are eventually won. There were some berserkers and things on the field, so it took a very long time to kill all of them. Eventually they die in the blobs. That's the end of that. Higher than average casualties because the enemy ground us down a bit for a while, especially at the end. But maybe that doesn't matter. The goal there was just to take out an army that could threaten Elrond. Now Elrond is safe to wait for a turn to get some siege gear to make his attack, and as for Onodrith, we're just going to sit here. With Saruman now discovered, I don't need to be too aggressive about pushing to the west because we may not need to deal with any of that. We just need to hold our position and see what happens when Saruman is caught. So that will be my main project for the next part, trying to get an army to him and trying to bring him down. Why don't you join me to see if that's the final part of the campaign?